I wasn't supposed to be there. That bar, tucked into the second floor of a business hotel in downtown Seattle, was the kind of place you pass 100 times and never really notice. Generic enough to be forgettable. Fake leather booths, frosted glass dividers, abstract art on the walls that could have been bought by the pound. It catered to traveling consultants, tech meetups, and corporate types who wanted to drink without leaving their comfort zones. Nothing about it should have mattered, but I'll never forget that place. I had only ended up there by accident. My buddy Max had flown in from Chicago for a conference. One of those niche SaaS expos where everyone wears lanyards and pretends to care about disruption. He was crashing at the Hyatt for 2 nights and texted me on a whim. Drinks at 8, bar in the lobby, 2nd floor. Your city, you pick the first round. I almost didn't go. I was tired. Work had been rough that week, and I'd barely seen Kate. She'd been coming home late, buried under Q4 prep, and I figured maybe we could finally have a quiet evening. But when I texted her around 7, she replied fast. Sitting in the bar with the team. Might be late. Love you, Red Heart. It didn't even register at first. Just another busy night for her, right? So when I got to the bar around 8:20 and scanned the room for Max, I wasn't expecting anything. I walked past the hostess, past the little sign that read, Private Event, Product Strategy Mixer, and kept moving toward the main area, where Max was already posted up near the corner booth with 2 IPAs and a grin that said, I've been here for too long without food. We were maybe 2 minutes into catching up when I noticed a group through the frosted divider to my right. My eyes caught on a familiar silhouette, shoulders I knew like muscle memory, a dark green dress I hadn't seen before, the unmistakable curve of Kate's smile as she leaned forward with a wine glass in hand, and next to her, Harvey, her boss. They were seated closely, too closely for what Kate would call team spacing. He was mid-laugh, one hand cradling a glass of scotch, the other resting lightly on the back of her chair. Kate leaned in, speaking low, something just below a whisper, and he chuckled again. Then he touched her shoulder, gently, like it was second nature. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back, didn't glance around. I don't think she knew I was there. In fact, I'm sure of it. She had no idea I was sitting 10 feet away, watching through the glare of a half-frosted partition that turned my reflection into a ghost on the glass. She was in her own world, laughing, whispering, and letting his hand stay where it didn't belong. My heart didn't shatter right away. It just paused, like it skipped 1 beat, then 2. Max was mid-story about a venture capital pitch that had gone sideways when he noticed my stare. He followed my gaze and blinked. Is that Kate? I nodded, still frozen. You okay? I took a sip of my beer, if only to do something with my hands. Yeah, just weird to run into her. He hesitated. You want to say hi? I shook my head. No, I said too quickly. Let her have her night. Let her have her night. Even saying the words made me feel small. Like I'd agreed to something I hadn't even known was on the table. She had told me she was with the team, and technically that was true. I recognized a few other faces from her office, a couple of junior PMs, her assistant Nicole, but no one was sitting quite as close as she was to Harvey. No one else was leaning in with that kind of smile. I turned back to Max and tried to pretend I hadn't seen anything. We talked. We laughed. We ordered food. But I couldn't stop glancing toward the partition. Watching them. Watching her. And the thing that haunted me most? She looked happy. Not performatively cheerful. Not end of a long workday tired. But genuinely happy. Like, engaged. The kind of expression I hadn't seen on her face in months. And definitely not at home. That K** led me more than the touch. When I finally excused myself, said I had an early morning, I passed her table on the way out. I kept my eyes down, hoping she wouldn't look up. She didn't. She was too deep in conversation, too far gone in whatever connection she and Harvey had sparked. And me? I was just another stranger passing through the periphery. When I got home, I showered, changed into sweatpants, sat on the couch and stared at the blank television screen for almost half an hour. She came in around 10:30. Her heels clicked softly across the floor. She was still wearing that green dress, still holding the same wine smile, though slightly dulled now by the night. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys into the dish. "Sorry I'm late. Harvey insisted we do a quick team toast. You know how he is." I turned, keeping my face neutral. "Yeah, I think I saw you. I was at the bar for a bit. With Max." Her brows lifted. Just a flicker. "Oh? Weird. I didn't see you." "Yeah. It was loud. Looked like you were having fun." She shrugged out of her coat and smiled. "You know those events. Everyone pretends to be more excited than they are. Mostly we were talking about the Q4 launch." Then, as if anticipating a question I hadn't asked, she added, "Harvey made some dumb joke and did that shoulder tap thing. You know, part of the bit." "Shoulder tap thing. Part of the bit." I nodded. "Sure." She headed upstairs without another word, leaving the faint smell of her perfume behind. Something floral and expensive. Not the kind I'd bought her. That night, I lay awake long after she had fallen asleep beside me. I stared at the ceiling, trying to quiet the noise in my head, replaying every frame of what I'd seen. The laughter, the touch, the glance, that dress. I told myself it was probably nothing. I told myself I was being dramatic. But deep down, I knew better. Something in me had cracked that night. Not because of what I saw, but because of how quickly she explained it away. How prepared she had been. How little she hesitated. And once that crack appeared, I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. The strange how fast your mind replays things when it's looking for proof. After that night in the bar, something in me changed. Subtly at first, like a draft you don't notice until the room starts feeling cold. I didn't confront Kate. I didn't accuse her. I told myself I had no real evidence, no concrete reason to make a scene. Just a glimpse, a gesture, a moment that didn't sit right. But after that, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Everything that once seemed minor suddenly became a pattern. Like how she'd stopped wearing her old cozy sweaters, the ones she used to curl up in on weekends, when we'd sit around watching bad TV and pretending we'd do house projects that never happened. Those sweaters got replaced by sleek, expensive blouses and dresses I didn't recognize. Heels instead of sneakers. Lipstick shades that never made it into our bathroom trash bin. A new perfume I couldn't name. She'd started spraying it behind her ears before leaving the house. Something light and unfamiliar, floral with a citrus bite. I remember standing in our kitchen one morning, watching her walk out the door in a tailored black dress I'd never seen before. It clung to her in a way that didn't scream practicality. I said, "Big meeting today?" And she smiled, nonchalant. "Just internal stuff," she said, grabbing her travel mug. "But you know how Harvey is. Always pushing us to dress for the role you want." I nodded, but I didn't buy it. We used to joke about how ridiculous corporate dress codes were. She once rolled her eyes at a VP for wearing cufflinks to a video call. Now she was mirroring them. Not just dressing up, but becoming someone else entirely. Then came the late nights. They started gradually, first once a week, then twice, then almost every other day. She'd text me around 6 saying, "Running late. Harvey's dragging us into one more review." Or, "I promised I'd help prep slides for Denver." At first, I believed her. She'd always been dedicated. She cared about her team, her work. But something about the way she said it changed. Too efficient. Too rehearsed. Like the message had already been written in her mind hours before she sent it. And her phone? Her phone, once forgotten on the kitchen counter or left charging in the bedroom, became an extension of her body. Always face down. Always on silent. Even when we were on the couch together watching a show, she'd glance at it when it buzzed, just for a second, then flip it back over like it wasn't worth mentioning. Once I asked, "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Just Nicole. Work stuff." It was always work stuff, but it never added up. There was also this subtle new habit of hers, ending conversations before they started. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd brush it off with, "Same old meetings," or "You don't want to hear about vendor drama." And then she'd pivot, "How was your day?" and steer us somewhere safer. She wasn't shutting me out all at once. Just a little more every day. Like closing a door 1 inch at a time. The thing that hit me hardest, though, the one that I couldn't stop replaying, was what happened in June. She deleted our shared cloud folder. We'd had that thing for years. A dumb little relic from when we were still engaged. Recipes we never cooked, weekend itineraries, scan bills, tax returns, even a spreadsheet for our honeymoon planning. It wasn't glamorous, but it was part of our life. And out of nowhere, it disappeared. I asked her about it at the time. "Oh," she said, not even looking up from her laptop. "I'm restructuring stuff. My work stuff was spilling into it. Easier to just clean house and start fresh." I didn't think twice about it then. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't the kind of thing you erase unless you're trying to separate your life into clean compartments. The kind of erasure that feels like premeditation. That deletion had happened 2 weeks before she flew to Boston for a client training seminar. She said it was just her and the new PM, Jordan. Strictly business, she'd told me. I hadn't even asked. But I remembered now how oddly specific she'd been. Almost like she knew I might wonder. Like she wanted to answer a question I hadn't asked yet. The more I looked back, the more things started unraveling. Small moments I had dismissed now stood out like bright red warning lights. I remembered the night I found a new contact saved in her phone. Harvey C. Direct. Nothing strange about that except he'd always text her from his regular number, not some alternate contact. I only saw it once, when her phone lit up on the counter while she was upstairs. I didn't say anything then, but it stayed with me. Or the morning I caught her looking at herself in the mirror, holding her phone like she was framing a picture. I asked if she was taking a selfie, teasing her, and she said, "No, just checking my earrings." But her smile had cracked just for a second. Then there were the conference calls. She used to do them on speaker, pacing the kitchen like a caffeinated consultant, full of sarcastic commentary. But recently, she started taking them in the bedroom with the door closed. "Noise distraction," she said. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But belief without evidence is just hope. And I wasn't hopeful anymore. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I found myself standing in the hallway outside the bedroom door, staring at the soft light from under the crack. Her phone was charging next to the bed. I stood there paralyzed. I wasn't proud of what I was thinking, but I also couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't go in. Couldn't. Instead, I went back downstairs, opened my laptop, and started pulling old backups from my cloud account, just to see what still synced, just to see what she might have missed when she wiped the shared folder. It was a long sh*T. But the thing about digital traces is, even careful people overlook something. And she had one thing, an old sync link to her iPad, buried in the archived settings. I'd forgotten we even connected them, but it still worked. I clicked, and suddenly, I was back inside the shadows of her digital life. I didn't expect to find anything. Not really. Part of me thought maybe I was crazy, paranoid, overanalyzing. That may be all of this. The dress, the touch, the late nights, was a slow-motion misunderstanding I'd stitched together to protect myself from boredom or insecurity or something darker I didn't want to name. But when I opened the iPad, I realized just how much she hadn't erased. It was one of her older devices, buried in a drawer barely charged. I had found it in the guest room closet while looking for something else, which is how most unwanted truths show up in life. It lit up as soon as I plugged it in. Still logged in. Still connected to the old cloud account. And that's where it started. Most of it was just noise, work notes, calendar reminders, shopping lists. But tucked into the drafts of her email app was a message that stopped me cold. It wasn't sent. It was saved, almost like she'd written it and backed out at the last second. Maybe she just wanted to see the words out loud before deleting them. Maybe she thought no one would ever read it. It was addressed to Harvey. The subject line was blank. The message itself wasn't long. But it said enough. "Harvey, thank you. For everything. For Boston. For Chicago. For seeing me. For letting me be someone I didn't have to explain. You're the first person who's made me feel that. I'm figuring out how to wrap things up neatly on my end. Just give me a little more time. K. I read it once, then again, and again. Boston and Chicago. She had told me those were just work trips. The kind of stuff where she'd leave on a Tuesday and return Thursday night, exhausted but glowing from client wins. I remembered the Chicago trip specifically because she brought back a souvenir mug from the airport gift shop. At the time, I joked that it was a lazy gift. She laughed and said, "What do you expect from O'Hare?" I stared at the email draft. The phrase, "wrap things up neatly," that wasn't the language of someone who was trying to fix a marriage. That was the language of someone preparing to end one. The rest of the night was a blur. I started pulling everything. Flights, receipts, emails, anything I could access through our shared logins. And while she had tried to be careful, there were things she'd missed. A few too many, like her booking history for company travel. Kate worked in product strategy, and most of her bookings went through a corporate system that automatically forwarded confirmations to her work email. But for some reason, maybe convenience, maybe oversight, her login was still stored in our shared browser under autofill. So I opened it. The trip to Denver was supposed to be her next conference. I clicked through the reservation and opened the hotel listing. It wasn't one of the hotels mentioned in the event brochure she'd emailed me weeks ago. It was a boutique place. Off-site, stylish, expensive. I checked the booking ID. 2 guests. Not 1. 2. Room booked under her name. Second guest listed as James T. Likely fake, likely harmless on its own. But I wasn't looking for a smoking G*N anymore. I was building a chain. This was another link. I went back to the Chicago trip. She told me she was staying at the Hyatt by the river. But the reservation history showed a booking at a different hotel altogether, the Delancey. Same dates. Same price range. 2 guests. This time, the second guest field was blank. The payment method? Her corporate card. Clever. But not clever enough. I dug into the conference schedule she had forwarded to me, found the listed venues for each night's events. None were at or near the Delancey. In fact, the closest one was a full 20-minute ride away. No shuttles. No group transport. Just her, attending panels, while sleeping nowhere near them. I cross-referenced the timestamps from her social media posts. In Chicago, she had uploaded a story of skyline views from the 14th floor. The Delancey only had 10 floors, which meant it wasn't a real-time post. It was staged, recycled. I kept pulling threads. Calendar invites from her assistant mentioned working sessions late into the night. But one had a peculiar line in the notes field. As usual, leave second key at the desk. He knows. I stared at it, numb. Not she. Not they. It wasn't even subtle. I remembered how her assistant, Jenna, had always seemed unusually loyal. Like Kate was her mentor, her confidant. Now I wondered how much she knew. How many lies had been told not just to me, but to other people inside the same machine. It was no longer suspicion. It wasn't paranoia. It was fact. Cold, clean, corporate-level cheating, covered in emails and calendar invites and travel records. And the thing that hurt the most? She had planned it. This wasn't something that happened. It was something she built. Slowly, thoughtfully, like a parallel life growing next to mine. Just enough distance so the roots didn't tangle. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, looking at her while she slept. Her face was relaxed, peaceful. She had no idea that everything was starting to unravel, that the version of herself she had curated so carefully had slipped, just enough for me to see behind the curtain. And for the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt calm, because now I didn't have to ask questions anymore. I knew the truth. Once you know the truth, your memory becomes a crime scene. Everything you dismissed as harmless becomes a clue. Conversations you once forgot return with perfect clarity. A sentence she said in passing now rings like an alarm. It's not just the lies that hurt. It's realizing how often you heard the truth and didn't recognize it for what it was. That weekend, I stopped pretending. I didn't confront her. I didn't bring up the email draft or the second hotel guest or the reservation notes about the key at the desk. Not yet. Instead, I became quiet. Still. Focused. I started listening harder. And that's when it all began to click. There was an old conference call I remembered from months ago. Kate had been working remotely that week, and I was home with the flu. I remember lying on the couch, half asleep under a blanket, while she took a leadership call on speaker in the kitchen. I hadn't been paying attention. Back then, her calls were just white noise to me. But suddenly I remembered something she said. Not her words exactly, but the tone. It had stuck with me at the time because it didn't sound like her. Not the Kate I knew. It was measured, flat, almost performative. I went back and looked through her company's internal portal. Took some digging. Leadership syncs were recorded, archived for those who missed the live call. She never mentioned that. I logged in with her old credentials. They still worked. One file, dated 2 months ago, was marked with an asterisk, partial upload. I clicked it. Audio only. It was damaged, glitchy in places. But at the 18-minute mark, I heard her voice. Clear, professional, controlled. "He thinks I'm still choosing," she said. "But I made my choice a long time ago." Someone, Harvey, I was almost sure, laughed in the background. A soft chuckle, followed by a vague, "Well played." Then the audio dipped again. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. She had been talking about me. And she wasn't confessing. She wasn't regretting. She was strategizing. Like it was a negotiation. Like I was a variable she needed to manage, not a person she loved. I sat there, staring at the wall. The voice in that call, it didn't belong to the woman I married. It belonged to someone I didn't know. Someone I never would have chosen. It was like watching an old home video of someone you love, only to see them wink at the camera in a way you never saw in real life. A version of themselves they saved for others. After that, I couldn't unhear it. Her tone, her wording, the way she'd been talking to me for months, always slightly edited. Cautious, evasive. "I'll be late tonight, Harvey's looping us in again. This trip is more prep than anything. It's all strategy meetings, really. Nothing exciting." Each line, rehearsed, smoothed out like glass over sharp stones. In her work inbox, still accessible through the cached browser, I found an email from her assistant, Jenna. Just a logistics update, nothing remarkable on the surface. But the last line chilled me. "As usual, leave the second key at the desk, he knows." 3 months ago, I would have read that and assumed it was for a colleague. Maybe even herself. Now I knew better. I pulled the email metadata. Hotel name. An executive suite in Dallas, booked under Kate's name. Dates aligned with a leadership offsite she had mentioned to me offhandedly while folding laundry. "Just a few of us," she'd said. Probably boring. She hadn't packed much for that trip. I remember thinking she was underdressing for Texas heat. But now I wondered how much thought had really gone into it. Probably more than I wanted to admit. I looked up the hotel's security policies. They stored footage for 30 days. Barely within range. It took time. Too much time. And a few half-truths on the phone. But eventually, I got someone to help me locate a lost item. That was the story I told. I needed footage from the lobby entrance, just to confirm when she had arrived. I claimed it was tied to insurance. I gave them the exact date, time window, and room number. They sent the clip. She entered at 10:04 p.m. Harvey followed 3 minutes later. Not at the same time. Not together. Just close enough to avoid attention. But not close enough to deny what it was. And then I remembered the phrase she had used months ago, during a small argument we had in the car, after I asked if she ever felt like she was living 2 lives, one at work, one at home. She had laughed, but then said, "Sometimes I wish I could just combine them." Back then, I thought she meant work-life balance. Now I realized she meant something else entirely. She wasn't splitting herself in two. She was choosing which life to keep, and which to leave behind. It's amazing what we convince ourselves of when we're in love. The other thing I hadn't told anyone, not even Max, was that I had started seeing a therapist months ago. I thought I was just burned out. I thought work stress was the issue. But during one session, I remember describing Kate's distance. "She's not pulling away," I told my therapist. "She's just tired. Work is insane. She's on the edge of a promotion." My therapist asked me, "Do you feel like she's hiding something?" I shook my head. No, not hiding, just overwhelmed. That was 6 months ago. Now I realized she wasn't overwhelmed. She was done. She had already left. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, mentally, she'd packed her bags long before that trip to Boston. I was just the last to know. That night, I walked through our house, our shared life, room by room, looking at what she'd left behind in plain sight. A half-folded cardigan on the couch, a favorite mug on the shelf, a framed photo of us from our trip to Vancouver, still smiling in that perfect fall light. And it hit me with full force. I was living inside a museum. Everything around me was a relic. She had already moved on. She was just waiting for the right moment to turn the key. At first, I thought this was just about me. About us. A failing relationship. A drifting marriage. A betrayal between two people who stopped showing up for each other. But the deeper I looked, the more I started to understand. This wasn't just personal. This was a pattern. A system. And Kate wasn't the only one caught in it. It started with a name. Samira Torres. She used to work on Kate's team. A senior strategist who'd been around long before Harvey was promoted to regional VP. Kate had mentioned her a few times in passing, mostly in that clipped, overly neutral tone people use when they don't want to gossip, but also don't want to lie. She's great at data, not so much at playing the game. I remember asking why she left, and Kate had shrugged. Got poached, I think. Or maybe she just got tired of the nonsense. It happens. I didn't think twice about it then. But after everything I'd uncovered, the email, the reservations, the voice on that leadership call, I found myself wondering where Samira actually went. And more importantly, why no one had said much about her after she disappeared. I searched her name online. Her LinkedIn profile was still active, but hadn't been updated in over a year. No mention of a new company. No professional activity. Just a short bio and a profile picture that looked like it had been taken in a rush. There were no goodbye posts, no excited to announce transitions. Nothing. Felt erased. I did a reverse search on her name in connection with Kate's company. That led me to a few archived blog posts, buried deep in the company's internal medium. One of them, dated almost 2 years ago, featured a panel Samira had been on titled Women in Product Leadership. The write-up was full of buzzwords, but one quote stood out. If someone gives you a seat at the table, ask why they didn't before. And if they want to make it a secret, leave. I read that line 5 times. It didn't sound like something you say unless you've been through it. Unless someone made you believe silence was the cost of success. From there, the thread unraveled faster than I expected. 3 women. All had left within 6 months of each other. All held mid to senior roles on Harvey's regional teams. None had any formal complaints on record, at least not publicly. But each one had the same digital footprint. Sudden exit, vague job change, no forwarded titles or announcements. In the world of high-visibility product teams, that's like vanishing in plain sight. One of them, Caroline Ng, had posted regularly on industry forums until early last year. Then her activity dropped to 0. I found a cached version of her last post. It was short. Just a reply in a thread about quiet career exits. Sometimes it's not about burnout. Sometimes you're just not allowed to speak. Especially if the one making promises has 2 phones. I felt my stomach drop. 2 phones. I remembered one night last winter when Kate came home from a trip and left her tote bag on the kitchen island. I had moved it so I could start dinner and heard something buzz inside. When I asked if she'd forgotten her phone, she said, "No, that's my work line." Harvey had everyone set up new temp numbers for travel. I didn't question it. It made sense at the time. But now I was seeing the outline of something darker. It wasn't just cheating. It was grooming, control. Kate hadn't just been drawn in. She'd been studied, chosen, the same way the others had been. All high-performing, ambitious, respected. All pulled into something they couldn't publicly speak about, then discarded or pressured out once the line between personal and professional blurred too far. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Not the way I had been. I was something else. Something colder. Curious. Determined. I needed to know how far it went. I found an anonymous forum. Invite only, mostly women in tech and product roles. A mix of venting, career advice, and confidential warnings about toxic leadership. I wasn't supposed to have access, but an old college friend of mine, Lauren, had once shared her login with me back when she was dealing with harassment from her boss. I'd forgotten I still had it. I searched for Harvey's name. Nothing. But when I searched for VP with 2 phones, one result came up. It was posted under a burner username, Rutax Estinide. If he says it's a mentorship opportunity but only talks after 9 p.m., it's not mentorship. If he says you're different from the others, believe him but not in the way you want. If he says it's our little secret, run. Especially if he has 2 phones. The post was 3 paragraphs long. No names. No locations. But every line rang like a bell. She mentioned Dallas. She mentioned a card under my name, but his signature at the front desk. She mentioned walking away with a promotion and a therapist. And finally, she ended the post with this: I wasn't the first, and I'm terrified I won't be the last. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the list of names I'd pulled. Samira, Caroline, Priya, and now Kate. Each of them had once stood where she stood, close to Harvey, rising fast, quietly pushed into special roles. And then, one by one, they disappeared. Some left the company. Some left the industry. And at least one of them, Kate, chose to stay. Chose him. I wondered if they had also smiled across that glass partition in the hotel bar. If they'd leaned in close and whispered something that wasn't meant to be heard. I wondered if anyone else had seen it like I did. I kept asking myself, did she know? Was Kate aware of the pattern? Of how many came before her? Or did she think she was different? That this time it was real? Sometimes I think she must have known. Other times, I imagine she convinced herself she was special, that she wasn't being used, that this was finally the life she deserved. Either way, it didn't change the outcome. She had stepped into a cycle that had chewed through people before her and would likely do it again. She made her choice. But at least now I understood the scale. This wasn't just betrayal. It was replication. She didn't just lie to me. She became someone else to do it. And I knew now this didn't end with her. But it had to start ending with me. I didn't yell. Didn't demand answers. On her birthday, I left a gray envelope on her desk. Inside, the Boston hotel receipt, the audio from that leadership call, and a photo from the Dallas hotel camera. She opened it silently. No tears. No excuses. She just knew. The next day, she packed and left. No fight. No goodbye. Just the sound of the door closing behind her. It was over before it started. A week later, she mailed me a letter. Perfect handwriting, no regret. She said I was too kind to fight, that Harvey gave her clarity, and hoped I'd someday let go of the version of her I built. I read it once, then burned it, not out of anger but to end it cleanly. She was right, I wasn't the same man. The one she left behind had seen everything. And now I chose silence, because silence lingers longer than revenge.